On the outskirts of Rome, Italy, there's a cemetery. And in that cemetery, there's a grave of a man who died centuries before. He was an unbeliever. He was completely against Christianity. But he was also a little bit afraid of it, too. So this is what he did. He had a huge stone slab put over his grave because he told all of his friends before he died he did not want to be raised from the dead, just in case there was a resurrection from the dead. He had insignias placed all over the slab saying, "I do not want to be raised from the dead. I don't believe in it." Well, evidently, when he was buried, an acorn must have fallen into the grave. So 100 years later, the acorn had grown up through the grave and split that slab. It is now a tall and towering oak tree. If an acorn has that kind of power to come to life, to split the slab of that kind of magnitude, does not our God have the power to raise us from the dead? The power of the resurrection is about the promise that this life is not ended, it's only changed. There is something waiting for us that we cannot possibly imagine. There is another life, and Jesus broke through death to give us this message of hope. But as Matthew Fox writes, resurrection is not just about the next life, but it's an invitation to live this life fully. Easter's celebration in springtime is definitely not accidental. Nature herself is resurrecting after winter's burial, and we follow suit. The Paschal mystery continues. No beauty, no warmth, no love is ever lost in the universe. It all gets recycled, whatever form it takes. This is the hope of Easter. Good Friday always gives way to Easter. Winter always gives way to spring. New life, new growth, new hope for all of us who live in this life, a life mixed with joy and sorrow, birth and death. Now, it's very interesting that the scriptures tell us that the body of Jesus that was experienced by the apostles on that Easter morning was not a body that was freed of all wounds. Jesus returned to the world filled with the scars of his journey, this journey from death to life. He presented himself to the apostles with an imperfect body that carried with it all the memories of the struggles and the pain and the sorrow that he endured, to remind the apostles that as imperfect human beings, life will offer us much pain and there will be many scars, but that Easter promises that those scars will not be forever. Jesus' scars are only memories of his crucifixion. So our hope, the promise of Easter, is that the tears that we shed, the blows we receive, the emotional pain, the heartache over lost friends and loved ones, the abuse, the rejection, the failures, the disappointments, will all become memories, like the scars on the body of Jesus, just reminders of what we went through. Easter tells us that the scars will be there, but the pain will vanish because we will be recreated, that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Now, as we celebrate Easter in this year of 2013, we know that our world is filled with many painful things, as is our nation, and is our personal lives in many ways. We all have our own different kind of pain. But this kind of pain does not have to define us. As a church, we have a new Pope, Francis, and the scars of so many scandals will hopefully now be healed. On Thursday evening, he washed the feet of 2 women, and one of whom was a Muslim. President Obama just finished a trip to Israel and the Middle East, sowing the seeds of peace. There are good people everywhere struggling to bring light out of darkness, struggling to be Easter people. And thus, we as Easter people need to have the hope that the winter of partisan bickering that we've experienced in our national leaders will turn into the spring of compromise and renewal for our economy. As a world, we must have hope that nations will come together to find ways to live peacefully in this global world. Again, resurrection is not just about the next life, but it is an invitation to live this life fully. Resurrection is about the reality that the Good Fridays that we see all around us can and will turn into Easter Sundays if each one of us becomes charged with the power of Easter. If we only have the kind of perseverance that small acorn had. The British author A.N. Wilson, who only a few years ago was known for his scathing attacks on Christianity, celebrated Easter 2 years ago, and he proclaimed that the story of the Jesus of the Gospels is the only story that makes sense out of life and the challenges of life. He wrote this, he said, "My own return to faith has surprised none more than myself. My belief has come about in large measure because of the lives and examples of people I have known. Not the famous, not saints, but friends and relations who have lived and faced death in light of the resurrection story or in quiet acceptance that they have a future after they die." In his book entitled Has Christianity Failed You?, Ravi Zacharias points to one of the greatest proofs for the truth of Christ and the reality of the resurrection. And the greatest proof, he says, is the changed lives of Christians. And he goes on to give example after example of people with the power of Christ and the resurrection who have transformed their own lives and transformed the world. South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu was once asked the question, after all you've seen and endured, are you really as optimistic as your book Made for Goodness says you are? He gave a very interesting response. He said, "I'm not optimistic, no. I'm quite different. I'm hopeful. I am a prisoner of hope. In the world," he said, "you have very bad people. Hitler, Idi Amin, and they look like they're going to win. But all of them, he says, have bitten the dust." So what are the symbols of Easter? Empty cross, empty tomb, empty grave clothes. Well, one theologian gave a unique insight about these symbols, and he stated, "The world offers promises full of emptiness, but Easter offers emptiness full of promise." Emptiness full of promise. What a paradox. But the whole life and ministry of Christ was a paradox. His birth in a stable, his resurrection, the paradoxical statements he made in his ministry, like strength being made perfect in weakness, foolish things confounding the wise, the meek inheriting the earth, the poor getting the kingdom of God, dying in order to live. Paradoxical ministry, paradoxical statements, just as the paradoxical as the acorn's ability to split a slab of that magnitude. Now, there's no way that any of us can possibly understand this God that we struggle to believe in. But Jesus came to give us some kind of a glimpse of this God and to give us a message of hope. And Easter is the message of hope. Jesus tells us that even death is full of promise, that we are Easter people. We may feel empty at times in a world that's filled with so much violence and rage and war, brutality, inequality and broken relationships, betrayal and disease. But in all of this emptiness, there is promise. The world's promises are filled with smoke and mirrors, offering no life, but only death. The promise of Easter gives us life through death. If an acorn can split that enormous slab, we as Easter people can recreate our world and we can recreate our own lives, our own selves. Easter is not about optimism, as Desmond Tutu stated. It's about hope. Easter challenges each one of us, you and me, to be prisoners of hope. So no wonder that man buried in Italy so many centuries ago was afraid of Christianity. The power of Christ, the power of the resurrection, cannot be stopped, even for those who don't believe in it.